I have put a frightening amount of time into Marathon so far. It's the only game I want to play right now. I'm considering the implications of story revelations during the day and collecting unstable biomass in my dreams. If no one puts a stop to this, I think it's a real GOTY contender already. I'm a massive Halo fan, but I never really clicked with Destiny. So when Bungie started teasing Marathon, I hesitantly followed it to see if they've still got it after 15 years of working in the Destiny mines. I loved the visuals they showed off and figured, best case scenario, if anybody could make an extraction shooter for me, it would probably be Bungie. But after the misfire that was their planned September 2025 launch, I figured they were done. Washed, cooked even. In Marathon's absence, I did play a decent amount of Arc Raiders and had a great time with it. But after the novelty of that game's surprisingly active proximity chat wore off, I wanted something more hostile, something more of a shooter, honestly. When Marathon started to reemerge early this year, I hardly even looked at it. Why would I? How different could this game be from the one that crashed and burned a year ago? But I was convinced to download the server slam, and from my first steps on Tau Ceti 4, I was hooked. Bungie's got a remarkably clockable style of crafting games. What I meant by does Bungie still have it was more like, can Bungie still make a Bungie game? We'll use that first Halo game as an example. For that game, Bungie took popular gameplay ideas within the time and genre they were working in this case, moody but fast-paced first-person shooters like Quake, Unreal, and Half-Life. They then created a gameplay foundation by adding the Bungie twist to those games. Typically, that means simplifying and polishing those existing ideas in a way that only Bungie can. For Halo, this meant things like automatically recharging shields, the 2-weapon limit, and perfecting dual analog controls. The other parts of a Bungie game are in using that gameplay foundation to explore a unique fantastical setting and narrative, as well as best-in-class combat design, wildly satisfying gameplay, or enemy behaviors that are dynamic in a fight but predictable enough to master. You can apply this framework to virtually every Bungie release and it holds up. So is Marathon a real Bungie game? Do they still have it? It might be too early to say, but there's a compelling argument that it is, and they do. Marathon is, in case you were somehow unaware, an extraction shooter. This means it plays like a looter shooter in the moment-to-moment, but death means losing your loadout and everything you collected since entering the map. Typically, these games involve being placed onto a map full of loot to collect while having to contend with both NPC enemies and other players competing for the same objectives you have. Also typical of extraction shooters is the way that the game uses quests to direct players while on a raid. Different from a battle royale, there isn't a major objective that all players are naturally funneled towards, so you need something like a quest to get players to make long treks around the map and force confrontation. Extraction shooters have existed for kind of a long time now, but have only entered the mainstream recently. On the surface, Marathon is fairly standard for the genre. So, currently popular gameplay structure and format? Check. Marathon sets itself apart in a lot of ways, one of the most obvious being gunplay. Over the years, Bungie has learned how to make it feel really good to shoot a gun in a video game, and Marathon is exactly in line with this. No review of Marathon can ignore how good the audio-visual feedback is for just shooting a gun at something. The animators at Bungie are truly masters of their craft, and it's great to see them flex with these really unique, abstract gun designs. Extraction shooters are brutal games with such a harsh punishment for failure. Bringing good gear with you risks you losing it and having to build back up if you die. Marathon softens this, but just a touch. While yes, you do lose everything you brought with you when you die, there's a lot of ways to get yourself set back up again. At a minimum, you can pick up an unlimited amount of the day's free sponsored loadout, which will include an unmodified gun and some basic healing consumables. The thing about that is, even with very strong gear, you are never invincible. A careful player with a free loadout will almost always beat a careless player with expensive kit. On top of that, the runner shells are also free, so you never lose access to them no matter what. Bungie has clearly put a lot of effort into smoothing out the extraction shooter experience while maintaining the bite and tension that comes with these games. A foundation with a predictably Bungie twist? Check. Now, there's a few things that I'm kind of in two ways about. For one, I just mentioned shells, and I figured I should explain what those are. In fiction, shells are biomechanical avatars that runners, read players, control remotely. There's some implication that the connection runners have to shells goes deeper than that, though. In gameplay, they work a lot like heroes in Apex Legends. So yeah, regrettably, Marathon is a hero shooter. There's no real getting around that. But at worst, the hero shooter elements are value neutral to the whole thing. On one hand, they function like heroes in a hero shooter. We've all heard it before, arbitrarily bundling abilities and equipment together limits player freedom and expression. On the other hand, they function like heroes in a hero shooter. So as long as the designs are distinct enough, it makes fast, tense fights more readable if you can look at another player and have a good idea of what they're capable of. There's also the added bonus of shells and shell abilities being completely free, raising the relative strength of every player in a raid, which includes those who dropped in with sponsored kits. It's just nice to have that baseline of abilities that you can never lose access to. You can only have one active quest at a time, so even quests which are just kill 10 runners with your finisher can't be done in the background while you do other things. On one hand, this is pretty obviously padding. If you can do at maximum one quest per run, you're going to have to do a lot more runs than you would if you could just sprint around the map, knocking out a bunch of quests at once. On the other hand, it communicates to everyone on your team exactly what you're trying to do and has been generally helpful when coordinating with other players. There's also a real concentrated effort from Bungie to make the entire community experience the game at the same time, and deliberately slowing down progression means that the most dedicated players probably won't do everything the day after a season drops. On that note, though, the launch game does give minimum viable product. The amount of shells, maps, quests, etc. feels kind of anemic. If you trust Bungie, then this is fine. They intend to stagger the release of new content so that the entire community gets to experience the game in sync with each other. But many don't trust them, and not for no reason. There's really no way to know what, if anything, is on the horizon for Marathon, especially considering they didn't have any story written at the time of the first public alpha tests. This distrust is, I think, why so many people are obsessively checking Steam charts, too. Who knows if this thing lived up to Sony's expectations vis-a-vis player population, and if it didn't, they could pull the plug on it at any time. Checking concurrent player numbers to make an argument that one game is better than another, or calling a game dead that has tens of thousands of active players, is unemployed behavior, though. A common player tendency in extraction games is what's called gear fear, essentially being so scared to lose your good stuff that you either never bring it with you or play too slowly and cautiously. A common rebuttal to this is to change your relationship with your gear, to think of it less like how you would in a game like Destiny where it is uncontrovertibly yours, and instead think of your gear as borrowed. Marathon's pace and high power floor feels like playing an arena shooter with pistol starts, but just over a longer time span. You spend your time scouring the map for weapons and power-ups until you hit a point where you can start challenging other players. Successes compound as you get more kills and find better stuff. That is, of course, until you get killed, sending you back to square one with a usable but less powerful setup. Often this will happen before you get the full use out of a powerful weapon, but that's just how it goes. In an arena shooter, this loop happens over the course of a few minutes or seconds, but in Marathon it's closer to hours. There's actually a lot about Marathon that delivers on the fantasies presented in early FPS. The way you creep around abstract environments trying to find guns and ammo while opening up more and more of a map full of hostile forces. I think this is how they wanted you to feel while playing Doom in 1993, or indeed Marathon in 1994. One thing that's going to scare some players is the way that seasons are going to be handled going into the future. Every season, everyone's vaults will get completely wiped. Now, if you hold on to that mindset of the gear not being yours, this is fine, good even. Clearing out everyone's inventory on a regular basis would theoretically allow Bungie to make sweeping balance and sandbox changes between seasons without messing with anyone's stuff. And I do think it's necessary to drop the best players back down to zero every so often to give the common man a chance. On the macro scale, if you think of individual runs as rounds and the larger season as a full match, it still fits that arena shooter analogy. If you have a rocket launcher 30 seconds before the game ends, you may as well do something with it before you can't anymore. That's how people treated their vaults at the end of the server slam, and I suspect that's how the last few days of each season will feel.
Oh crap. I'm gonna die. So much energy.
Marathon is a game that requires you to lock the fuck in. It's not the kind of game to stick a video on the other monitor or work on a playlist to, and I appreciate the hell out of that as someone who often has a hard time paying attention to one thing at a time. Fights are often decided fast, and with your gear on the line, you can't afford to let your mind wander too much during a raid. The game gives you all the information you need, you just need to be receptive to it. You need to be checking every corner and stay aware of potential sightlines that you cross when traveling out in the open. Starting fights with UESC bots often draws in other runners from sound alone. And this isn't Arc Raiders where you can rely on other players being niceys. Almost any action taken by a runner or NPC makes a unique sound, letting you stalk players and stay out of sight of UESC forces without anyone being able to see you. It's got that stealth game design where you try your best to stay out of sight until something inevitably forces you to go loud. If you really pay attention, you might notice that each shell even has its own footstep sound, letting you guess at enemy squad team comps before you engage. Gameplay-wise, there's not one standout element that's totally new in Marathon. What has kept me hooked has been, of course, the execution of those ideas, but also the audio-visual treat that is just interacting with this piece of software. You've seen plenty of it already by this point, but Marathon looks like nothing I've seen before. They call the style graphic realism, and that seems like a fitting enough name. It's probably as close to a mixed media style as you can get within the constraints of photoreal AAA game visuals. Is a lot of it over-designed nonsense? Yeah, maybe, but it looks fucking sick. It really does transport you to a different world, one where the rules of form and function are completely different. You have to imagine that many of these machines, guns, or even the shells themselves were made to look this way for some kind of boring, practical reason in fiction, and I love to speculate about a setting where details like this serve some arcane practical purpose. Now, Destiny had a very deliberately minimal style, especially in the interface, and Marathon feels like the same artists unshackled from that style, allowed to go nuts to make cool shit that doesn't have to make sense. I've seen a lot of criticism of the UI, and yeah, on first glance, it looks overwhelming and strange, but like, isn't that kind of the point? The setting is full of weird, impenetrable technology. Why would the game's interface be any different? I mentioned the tactical value of the sound effects earlier, but not the effects themselves. Marathon has an extremely lush soundscape to reward you for paying attention. Claustrophobic interiors sound appropriately hostile, and exteriors sound vast and alien. The vibe of this game between fights feels like a classic childhood pastime of mine, walking around empty Halo maps. And oh man, the music. Both the music itself and implementation. Similar to the visual style, I have never heard anything that sounds like this, and the tracks work really well in this adaptive music system. Even the pre-arranged versions on the OST feel so unpredictable, and then you give the game the ability to slide stems around at will? Hell yeah. And it does do the classic Bungie thing of knowing when to back off. The music never outstays its welcome and is consistently able to punctuate the right moments. It feels like non-diegetic music wouldn't work this well in a game that is so reliant on you being able to clearly hear everything around you, but it never gets in the way somehow. I might look back at this video in a year and laugh, but for now, it feels like Marathon is going to be something really special. Maybe it already is. Finely tuned gameplay, a unique setting, a mystery story that feels like you are actively uncovering something the more you play, and a soundtrack that fucks this severely have come together to make something that I cannot put down. Is there a real possibility that Sony is unhappy with it in some way? Yeah, I mean, it seems like it sold really well, but who knows what the expectation was. Before the server slam, I did not care at all. I figured Bungie doesn't still have it, and Marathon would be a waste of time with Arc Raiders right there. But man, you gotta try this thing to see the vision.